Hey there, welcome to the Graced Health Podcast, your diet culture-free source for aging strong in your physical, mental, and spiritual health. My name is Amy Connell. I'm a weight-neutral certified personal trainer and intuitive eating-focused nutrition coach who loves walks with friends, chocolate, and Jesus. This is the place for women over 40 who are looking to grow strong as they age and nourish their body, mind, and spirit. I'm so glad you're here. If you are a new listener, first of all, welcome. And if you want to learn more about this podcast, go check out season 19 starting January 9th, 2024, and then listen to the episode 30 plus non-gym ways to improve your health. You'll find the free download that goes with that episode in today's show notes. Let's dive into today's episode. When you are the host of a podcast that is focused on perimenopausal women and beyond, it is rare that we have a voice that is not a woman. However, today we are diving into a conversation that is probably long overdue here, and that is how diet culture affects men, particularly in Christian spaces. I couldn't think of a better person to help us understand this than my guest, Jeff Ash. Of course, we need a man to come on to discuss this topic because nobody knows better than a man. You know, we talk a lot about how diet culture impacts us as women, but men experience these pressures too. They're just different, from the gym bro culture, you know what I'm talking about, to the subtle messages in church about what a, quote, godly man, quote, should look like. These expectations can weigh heavily on the men in our lives, even if we don't see it. Jeff Ash, my guest today, brings such a unique perspective to this conversation. Not only is he an intuitive eating coach who primarily works with men, he's also been a children's pastor and a worship leader. Jeff is obviously a Christ follower, a husband, a father of two. He is an avid rock climber. You will see this if you follow him over on Instagram. He's a nutritionist, an intuitive eating coach, and a personal trainer. His passion really lies in helping individuals and families transform their relationships with food, exercise, and their bodies, all without restriction, guilt, or shame. Yes, men want that too. And I just love that Jeff understands and lives in the intersection of faith, fitness, and finding balance. In this episode, we explore some really eye-opening topics like how diet culture shows up differently for men in Christian fitness groups, the challenges of black and white thinking when it comes to food and exercise, and even how our well-intentioned comments as wives and mothers might be impacting the men we love. If you are trying to support the men in your life, whether it's your husband, son, brother, friend, this conversation offers practical wisdom for approaching health and fitness for a more balanced, faith-centered perspective. Let's jump into my episode with Jeff Ash. Jeff, welcome.
Hey, great to be here.
I'm thrilled you're here. And I just want to jump in because I feel like we've got a lot of ground to cover. First, I have to acknowledge that you are one of the few men that has been on this podcast. So welcome to the world of women and menopause and hormones and trying to figure it all out along with how we're going to eat and move. So
yeah, well, I'm glad you had me come on, and you're not the first to tell me that I'm even the first. There's been several I've been on that were, wow, you're our first man to be on the show and that kind of thing. And so it's always great when people are open to hearing that other perspective on some of these topics and stuff.
Well, I think you're the perfect person to talk with us about today's topic, which is all about diet culture and men. So let's just jump in. And I'm wondering if I feel like there is a difference, but how does diet culture show up differently for men than for women?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think it shows up in similar ways, but yet there are some definitely some distinct ways that it tends to show up, and I see it most when as a member of some fitness groups that I'm in that are typical fitness groups, and they're Christian ones, so which you might think, oh wow, okay, they're probably not going to be so focused on appearance and this kind of thing, but in reality, it's pretty bleak, I guess I would say in one sense. because it really does mirror the culture. And in some ways, at certain areas, I think it can even be a little worse because there's this idea of what a Christian man is supposed to do, which there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, a lot of it is biblically based, but I think sometimes it's taken to extremes. And so while men are feel like they need to be lean and that, not carry too much body fat, just like women, it's not so much for beauty standards, although there is a strong push toward looking your best and looking like you take care of yourself and that taking care of yourself has a certain look to it. But there's also this idea that you also have to be strong. And so, you hear this among guys a lot of times. Do you even lift, bro? It's kind of a joking way of somewhat making fun of somebody who's skinnier and thinner. That kind of thing. It's interesting. I hear some of these discussions about guys talking about how, I think that it's certainly a good perspective to have, that we should be there to provide for and protect our families. But they take it to this level in cases where I see them, you have to be big and strong, when the time comes that you're going to be in hand-to-hand combat. And it's kind of like, oh, is that really that big of a concern? I mean, I'm 50, almost 53, and I have yet to use my hand-to-hand combat skills outside of a karate tournament setting. And so it's kind of interesting to see that. And if you don't have that mentality, it's often viewed as a sign of weakness, something that you should be changing. And so anyway, coming back to like body image and those kinds of things, it carries over into that. And so a lot of guys feel like they have to do certain things it's not just about getting healthy, it's about getting big and strong and healthy. And and so I do see a lot of that.
I wrote in my first book, Your Worthy Body, a very generalized statement, but you just confirmed it. And that is, in our society, and I think this is particularly true in American culture because different cultures around the world have different body ideals, I'm saying in quotes, but in general, women want to take up as little space as possible, and men want to take up as much space as possible.
Yeah.
And just like we have these conversations in our female-dominated spaces of our bodies are naturally, like, we have different muscle tone, we have different heights, we have different sizes. I think sometimes our society forgets to give that same nuance to men, even though they absolutely need it. And I can tell you, in my house, I have my husband, and then we have two boys. And my husband is, a long and lean kind of guy. And I am more of a dense and muscular, and, that's just my frame. And so our boys each got one of them. And so you look at them, they're practically the same height, but they literally weigh like 50 pounds different than each other just because of their natural size. And so I definitely see that a lot. And I'm also wondering if we can dig into that a little bit more, because I'm curious in terms of like the whole, not only body image diet culture, but also from the mentality of maybe food. And what I'm getting at is, anecdotally, I notice in conversations I have with men that it is very black and white, very all or nothing. And I'm wondering if you might be able to speak to that, or if that just happens to be the type of men I'm talking to, who are mostly in my husband's line of work.
Yeah. So definitely in the fitness spaces, that is the case, of very black and white. And unfortunate, this is what kind of drives me crazy too, with especially Christians should be gravitating toward discovering the truth, making sure that the things that come out of their mouth are truthful and that we're not exaggerating, that we're all of this kind of thing. And I find so many get sucked into these trends and things that are just not grounded in truth. And they get sucked in because they sound good, and then they spiritualize them. And so you got guys talking about certain eating patterns as being more or less godly. Now, they may not say the pattern you're eating in is ungodly, but they certainly use language that implies that, you are an undisciplined person. You're you're not exhibiting the kinds of qualities that would be something that I would expect from a spiritually mature man. In fact, this discussion's come up several times in a couple of different of these groups that are, one's all men and one's primarily men, and it is can a pastor be fat? Does that disqualify him? And so it's really interesting to see the discussions and the insights. Unfortunately, a number of people jump in and say that's a ridiculous question, and others will give a little bit more insight on why you can be a pastor and be fat. But it tends to gravitate more toward, no, that's a disqualifying characteristic in a sense, or they need to be doing something about it. Right away. And there was even we had a discussion recently about a pastor who was talking about having bariatric surgery. And, the guys were talking about, well, that's just taking the easy way out and this and that. And so just this whole mentality is, it's very cut and dry in many ways. And whatever dietary principles that guys tend to follow, they tend to hold on to it very tightly and tend to speak about it very dogmatically. Carnivore is so popular right now in the lifting communities, and you hear people talking about that. But even when it's not, it's keto. It's all keto, and it's got to be this, it's got to be that. Fasting, well, coffee breaks your fast, or does this break your fast? And all of these different kinds of things come up. So long way of saying yes, I think they can often get very black and white with the thinking on that, and even with training and things like that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely see that. I mean, it seems like there's not a lot of yellow light. It's just, it's red or green. Yeah. Where I think that there's so much to learn and so much value in the yellow. So I can speak from a female perspective and a teen girl perspective, because I do a lot of work for them as well. When I think about diet culture influences, I think about now in today's 2024 vocabulary, I think about Instagram, I think about TikTok, I think about the wellness industry in general on both of these platforms in particular, which I really want to do. I want to do an episode called "The Wellness Industry Has Lost Its Mind." Here's how not to lose yours, because it's gotten so bananas over there. I mean, growing up for me, it was magazines, it was billboards. I mean, just there, we are inundated with spaces of people just shooting diet culture at us. I only know like what I see, right? And so when I look at my people, I've got two people who are totally off the grid. No social media at all, not interested in any of that. One who is highly discerning about it. And so I'm sitting there looking at that going, I'm not sure that that's where diet culture is showing up for them. So I'm wondering if you might be able to point to some places that have the potential to be problematic in terms of diet culture, places, spaces, and maybe even people that might hit men differently than females.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think a lot of men pick it up from gym culture. So if they're hanging around the gym, you start to naturally pick it up. You might have a conversation with somebody at the gym and, oh, wow, you're looking jacked, and, what's your secret kind of thing. That's a common thing. What's your diet look like? What's your training look like? And as if that's how if you follow this, then you'll look like this, that kind of thing. And so I think that's one place that it can be picked up. And of course, that's a terrible place to pick it up, because the advice is generally not very well grounded. Most of your totally jacked guys, it's not that they don't work hard, but there's some genetic factors involved there 100%. That a lot of us, or time, when you're 24 and you don't even have a girlfriend and you can train as much as you want and eat however you want, it's a lot easier to look that way than it is when you're 45, a VP at a bank, and working 60 hours a week and doing church stuff. You're an elder at church and you have a family and you have young kids, all that stuff. So, but I think a lot of them also pick it up from, I hate to say it, we pick it up at church. We hear it from pastors. We hear it from Bible study groups. Men's groups, guys talk about what they're doing, which usually, like at least at my church, it's not come up like in any kind of a destructive or or problematic way, but it's still there. Oh yeah, I'm cutting out this, I'm cutting out that. Oh yeah, I'm trying to go to the gym more often. And it's not that any of those things are bad. It's that we hear that and we suddenly take that on as like, as that being something that we should be doing too. So you should be praying with your wife. You should be praying with your kids. You should be spending time. You should be involved in the ministry at church. Oh, and you should be lifting weights at the gym 5 days a week. And so it kind of gets lumped in with all of these other things. And I think that's more the subtle ways that diet culture can sneak its way in for men. And then men start thinking that when they are only going to the gym twice a week, which is actually quite healthy. That you get a lot of health benefits from that. They think, yeah, I've just been letting myself go lately. I'm not getting there 5 times a week anymore. I'm lucky to get in there 1 or 2, instead of thinking in terms of, wow, look, but I am taking care of myself. And yeah, I'm not as strong as I'd be if I went 5 days a week, but I'm healthy and that kind of thing. And so that all or nothing mentality is another way that I think that comes in. And then I think a lot of guys, the information they're picking up is not so much from social media, but from the internet still. They're Googling it and going on YouTube and watching, your Mark Hymans, your Jason Fungs, and your all these guys with these different protocols and crazy ways of approaching nutrition. Yeah.
There's a lot of optimizers out
Huberman,
there.
all of the, oh, you got to go check him out. And instead of just, let's get some consistent eating habits in place. Let's start there. And nope, that's not what you do. You got to cut out this, cut out that. You got to take these supplements, all or nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's 2 things there that my mind goes to. One of them is like, the optimization protocol, whatever that is. So I'm 49. I have a very big birthday this year, and I'm right in the thick of like perimenopause and like trying to understand my hormones. And I know my community is as well. And so as a personal trainer, I am thirsty for knowledge about like, okay, well, how can I meet my body where it is? Maybe make some tweaks, not in a dogmatic way, but just in a way of like, okay, things are changing. And so I'm going to change with them and, and see how that goes. And so one of the women I follow and I've learned from is Dr. Stacey Sims, who is a great researcher. And I feel like she presents a lot of her nutritional information in a pretty good way. I mean, I'm very comfortable with saying like, check her stuff out if you're, as long as you're not like dealing with particular eating disorders or something.
Right.
But she was on Huberman. I hate to pick on him, but like we're going through, because he has some good stuff. I mean, I definitely give that. But anyway, so throughout this interview, and she's talking about, strength training and he was like, okay, so let's create a protocol. We're going to call it the Sims protocol. I'm like, why do we need to make this a protocol? Like, why can't we take what works for us and not worry about the rest of the stuff? And so all of that for sure. And then the other thing I've heard you say a couple times is, and this wasn't your word, but like the chatter. So the chatter in different spaces for men may be permeating a little bit more, or maybe in a different way of like, oh, well, if this is what you're doing, and if you are a godly man who I respect and looks like you've got your life in order, then if you're doing that, then I need to do that. I think women do it as well, but maybe the maybe the intention of it is a bit different, or I don't know. Of course we're just so different. But the other thing too that I can't help but wonder is how many of us, and I can only speak for myself, but how many of us, now that we're learning about diet culture, now that we're learning about some of the harmful language or harmful messaging that we intended in love, that we intended to help, has hurt or harmed our men and the men in our life, whether they are adults or whether they are children. And I'm just wondering, for those of us who are like, oh man, I messed that up. Like, I taught my boys this. I taught my husband this. How can we begin to rectify those fissures of diet culture that can become really big and problematic if they're not filled in?
Yeah, and that's a hard one. I mean, like with anything, it's so much easier when you start from the beginning. So if you start your kids off using maybe Ellen Satter's approach to feeding kids, and where the parent decides what they're going to have and when and all that. And then the child decides what they're going to eat from what's offered at each meal. And they get in this habit of where they're determining how much they're going to eat. And it's just a natural thing. They grow into an intuitive eater versus the parent who's restricting the kid. And then suddenly when they're 13 says, okay, we're doing this intuitive eating thing now. And then they just throw the reins off, and then they're wondering why their kid is just in the pantry 24 hours a day. And it's because they've been restricted for so long, and now you've let them have that freedom. And so I think that it's definitely difficult when you've already ingrained those things. But just like with anything, just starting to change the language that you're using, and in some cases, I mean, flat out apologizing, especially if you realize that the way you've been doing things was just absolutely kind of over the top. And I think that's going to be up to each individual to decide kind of whether it's hey, I need to apologize for this, or I just need to start talking about this stuff differently. So, I remember my mom, I think she did Weight Watchers once or twice when I was a kid, but she never talked about it. So even if she were to change, I mean, she's really not a big dieter or anything by any means, but I would never expect her to, if she embraced intuitive eating specifically, to come back and apologize that she went on Weight Watchers one time and told me about it. It's like, that's unnecessary. So I think just changing the language and changing the way that you talk about things. And one of the big ones is change the way you talk about your own body. And that's probably harder than anything, because it's easier. I think it's easier to say, you know what, I'm not going to compliment my husband on his abs anymore. And I'm not going to slap his stomach when he's a little pudgier than usual, even though I don't even care. So maybe you're a wife and you really don't care and you just like to do it for fun. But some guys, honestly, that may not bother them at all, but other guys, it may, and they'll never tell you that it does, because how silly is that when your wife just rubs your belly that you would be have your feelings hurt about that? Yet it really does. It can sink in, and it does. Those small, subtle little things can affect you in that way. So anyway, those kinds of things, yeah, sometimes it's easy to change and say, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to say that anymore. But then you still are talking about how I look terrible in this outfit. And so you're still fixated on that appearance aspect, which continues to propagate that idea that a certain size body and a certain look is what you should be striving for. So I think that's probably where I would say is the biggest area is, and it's so hard to stop that, because we criticize ourselves, and we tend to be our own worst critics.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
My husband summed it up for me one time, which I thought was just brilliant. And it was probably after a season of just eating more than we wanted. And it was probably after a holiday season.
Mm-hmm.
I remember saying one time, oh gosh, I'm really just unhappy. I'm not feeling good in my body. And I don't really remember where I was in my own personal body awareness and language and all of that kind of stuff. So who knows what kind of words were coming out of my mouth. And he said, and it was just a recurring theme for a little bit of and he said, Amy, what's funny, he said, women will be unhappy and it's all they can think about. And it drives every single thing that they're doing in terms of their moving and how they're eating and all of that. And he was he said men, which I don't know if this is true for men or just for him, but he was men are I've gained a little weight. Oh, well. And he was it just doesn't occupy our head. And I think the point he was trying to get was it doesn't occupy the headspace. But, you're right. That is going to bother some men and stay in that space more than others. But I just thought that was so funny, because I was wait a minute, you mean you're not obsessing about all of this all the time? That's really interesting.
Well, and that's the interesting thing too, is it varies so much from person to person. So I'm one of those where my wife might make a comment like that, and I'm and it's just a small little thing. And in the moment, it bothers me, but then I forget about it 5 minutes later, and it really doesn't affect me. I'm not dwelling on it. But I know, and I've worked with men who it consumes so much of what they're thinking about throughout the day. And I think a lot of it depends on traumatic history in the past. Where you are spiritually, I think plays a role in that for people too. I mean, if you are not in a good place spiritually, you're much more likely to fall for those worldly ideals and ideas that can pull you astray. But even if you do get sucked into those, that doesn't mean that you are also not spiritually. So it's not a black and white issue. And so that's why it is so individual, and you really have to find out what it is that's driving a person's thoughts and the kinds of thoughts they're having about those things and how they're thinking about their body and where that's coming from. If it's somebody who thinks a certain way about their body because of childhood sexual trauma versus somebody who got teased a little bit in high school because they were chubby, and then but otherwise, other than that, they didn't have any major body issues. Yeah, they may manifest some of the similar kinds of things, but there's a whole different root that needs to be dealt with there. And I think that, unfortunately, too, that's something we see in the church a lot, too, is that mental health is often not taken very seriously. It's often diminished as a lack of spiritual maturity. If you're depressed, anxious, if you're having these issues, that the way to deal with it is to pray more, which, yes, that is part of it. But also seeking counsel and seeing a Christian counselor or Christian therapist is also another thing that can be super helpful so that you can get to a place where you can process things appropriately. And so I think that's part of what we see different in men too, especially in the church. It's becoming more accepted, but it's still especially in certain circles, it's still a big problem where if you are expressing mental health issues, then it's kind of a suck it up and, man up kind of a thing.
Yeah. I used to live in a different state and city, and there was a Bible college nearby that my neighbor was employed at. And I don't remember what role he had there, but he was in treatment for depression, and they let him go because of the depression, which is just astounding. It's funny when you were talking about how some things might bother some men, whereas it might not bother another man. The verse from 2 Corinthians 10:5, where you take every captive thought or take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ. To me, that is where our spiritual walk with Jesus can help us along in these situations, because it's like, okay, does my wife really think that I'm unattractive because she, pinched an inch on me or whatever?
Yeah.
Or, am I really not a good husband, or am I not a good leader in our family or in my church because of this? No, like taking it captive and like really turning and focusing on what Jesus says about us rather than the words that we're hearing. And some of them will hit harder than others for different people. So I think that's a really good point. I do have one question. You mentioned Ellen Sauter. I'm not familiar with her. Tell us really quickly about that.
Yeah, Ellen Satter, Satter.
Okay.
And then her first name is spelled Ellyn.
Okay.
And she is considered kind of the OG of child nutrition. And so she has another weight-neutral, non-diet approach called How to Eat that's similar to intuitive eating for adults and older teens. But then she also has something called the Satter's Division of Responsibility in Feeding. That is an approach that you use with younger kids typically, where the division of responsibility is the parent has a certain responsibility, certain parts are their responsibility, and the child has certain responsibilities. And the parent's job is to decide what, where, and when as far as food. So what food is going to be offered at meal times. And part of that is always making sure that there are options available that each one of your children is going to be comfortable eating, and so that they can fill up at every eating opportunity. And then the child decides whether they're going to eat and how much. So if the child, this whole you can leave the table after you eat 5 bites, that's not a thing. It's here's what's offered, here's what's on, and there's plenty of things here. There's bread here. Let's say a kid will eat 5 pieces of bread. You put the bread on there. They know that there's plenty to fill up on. It may not be ideal, obviously, from a nutritional standpoint, but over the course of the week, they're going to fill in all those gaps. Or if they skip a meal and don't eat as much, we know they're going to eat more at the next one, or vice versa. If they eat a lot at one, they're probably going to eat less at another. So anyway, you let the child decide whether they're going to eat and how much and which items they're going to eat. And then, but the when part in her program basically is a bit more structured. So you have structured meal and snack times. So the idea is that the child knows that at 8 o'clock in the morning, they're going to have breakfast. At 10:30 in the morning, they're going to have a snack. At noon, they're going to have lunch, and so forth. And so it helps them to feel more comfortable. If they're getting a little hungry, they know, you know what? I don't need to panic. I don't need to go hiding food and stealing food. I can just wait. And I also know that my snack is not just going to be a handful of pretzels. It's going to be something substantial and filling, so I can actually fill up, and that will carry me over till my next kind of meal time. And so it's a really great approach for kids to provide that structure in there. And so, yeah, you could definitely look up her stuff. And there's a great YouTube channel. I'm trying to remember what it is. I think it's Growing Intuitive Eaters, by Taylor. Gosh, what's her name? Taylor. I'm blanking on her last name, but anyway, yeah, it's a really cool approach for that. And the how to eat method is very similar to intuitive eating, tuning into your hunger and fullness and satisfaction, but it brings in an aspect of structure for your meal and snack times. So it's the same kind of thing. You're not grazing whenever you're feeling hungry. You're making sure that you're feeding yourself well at each kind of scheduled opportunity. And so, yeah, so it's a really neat approach. I actually use it a lot, bringing some of those aspects into my intuitive eating coaching with people. And especially men tend to find that, I mean, women do too, but men like, especially when they're very structured and they want like a plan, that gives them, okay, so this isn't a free for all. It's not just eat whenever I feel like it. It's like, no, there's a breakfast time, fill up there. Plan out a snack, be intentional about it. Here's some snack ideas. And so that can be really helpful.
Oh, you're giving us all kinds of unexpected, wonderful nuggets. And I'm just wondering if there are some women in my community who are maybe trying to help their children raise their grandchildren in more of a non-diet way. So I love that. And I haven't heard of her. So that's a good resource to know about.
Yeah. She's mentioned in the intuitive eating book. And so she's mentioned in there, and I'll send you a link. You can include that in the,
perfect.
In the show notes.
I'm also thinking about, maybe we're on this path of, maybe doing the apologizing, which, by the way, I have done that with my children, is like, hey, I think I'm now realizing that I used some, language that wasn't good or whatever. And now I'm trying to rectify my own situations. And I know a lot of my community as well, because they've some of them have confided in me about this. How can we point our men in a non-diet approach without coming across of like, well, you need to do this? Because I think that there's probably going to be a bit of a feeling of whiplash. Like, you were telling me to track my calories. You were telling me to get on this app and count my macros and make sure I was doing all of this. And now you're telling me, like, don't worry about it. Have whatever, and so there is that's got to be a little discombobulating to men. And maybe this is unfair of me, but a lot of men don't want their women telling them what to do. And a lot of young adult sons don't want their moms telling them what to do either. And so guide us through. This is a personal coaching session, Jeff. I don't know that you knew that. Yeah. I'm just...
I was going to, as you were telling me that, my first thought was quit treating men like children, because a lot of women do. And you didn't marry hopefully you didn't marry a guy because he was childish and you want somebody to take care of. Assuming that you married him because you thought he would be a godly man and a good leader for your family, then treating them like that is going to be the best way. So, and I say that, I mean, men often go off in the weeds. And so you're like your instinct is to stop it. Don't do that. Or here's how to do that. You're spinning your wheels. Here's how you can do that. But it usually doesn't come across very well from our partners. Just like, if my wife gives me advice and then I hear that same advice from somebody else, I may not take it from her, but I hear it from the other person or vice versa. And then they share something with you and you're like, didn't I just give you that same exact advice? No, you didn't. No, I don't think that's what you said. And just coming from somebody else, it often hits different. I mean, that's why counselors don't provide counseling for their spouses. Their spouses go to a different counselor and that kind of a thing. And same with parents. I had a older teenage girl that I worked with for a while, and her mom was actually an eating disorder specialist. And the girl was needing some guidance with some of her training and nutrition ideas. And she wasn't way off in the weeds, but the mom specializes in exactly what she needed, but she got somebody else to provide that for her. So I think the same is true for spouses and even teenage boys too. I mean, yes, you're still their mom, but they do have to start learning and they're going to start pulling away in those ways. And so if you can find a kind of a godly male mentor that's not their dad, because I mean, dads are great too, but it's still that father-son relationship where it's still a little different than if it's somebody at church. Often people relate well with their youth pastor or something like that. That can be hard though to find too, because it's not super
church.
Common. Yeah, you point them to this wonderful godly man who is wrapped up in diet culture. So,
yeah. I read an interesting study recently out of Stanford that basically said once teens, males and females, hit like 13 or 14, they literally tune into unfamiliar voices over familiar voices, particularly from their parents, particularly from their moms, which any mom of a 14-year-old is going to be, or any parent of a 14-year-old is like, well, I knew that. I didn't need a study. But the study confirmed what we all intuitively know as parents, which is they don't listen to us. And it's funny because I wrote this book for teen girls and I had a mom call me and she was like, my daughter is saying such wonderful things about this book. It's the same thing that I've been telling her. Why didn't it get, and she was upset. She was like, why didn't this get through to her? And I'm like, because I'm not you, because she's going to listen to me because I'm not you. So yeah, good points with that. And it also reminds me of something one of my pastors said years ago with regard to women and dealing with their husbands. And it wasn't about health perspective, but it was about spiritual health. But she was like, no woman has ever nagged her husband to Christ.
Yeah.
You're not going to nag your husband in anything. Like, it just doesn't work. So stop nagging.
Yeah, it really is. It's so easy to fall into that and to get frustrated. And so a lot of times it's understanding that we may not be the best one. And so that's where sometimes just changing our own language and how we talk about our own bodies is one way that we can start to communicate those things to others around. And yeah, it's such a difficult one. Every relationship's different too, because some relationships, having that very blunt conversation with your spouse may work really well in your relationship, but in other relationships it may not, and just based on past history and personalities and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, individualization for sure. I had over the summer a whole series on intuitive eating, and one of them, on one of the episodes, Kristin Williams came on, who's a registered dietitian. She works with eating disorder, and this was all from a Christian perspective. One of the comments Kristin made that I really liked is it's about the awareness of health and nutrition and nourishing our bodies, but it's not necessarily about the obsession. And I love that distinction because we dug into this a lot in several of my conversations, but like intuitive eating is not just this like, oh, woo woo, eat whatever you want, go have pretzels all day, every day. Like,
right.
It's not that. And I know you know all of that. And if you're listening and you're like, well, I don't even know what you're talking about, go back and listen to that, at least the wrap up episode, if you want to hear some more information on that. I'm wondering, and again, maybe this isn't fair. I know it does vary for the men, but just my anecdotal experience. Because when I'm out and I'm with my husband's coworkers, or it's like, what do you do? And so I'll talk about personal trainer. Which anytime I say I'm a personal trainer, they're like, it turns into confession, right? Like,
yeah,
I haven't been to the gym in forever, and all of this kind of stuff. But it seems like there's just more of the obsession and less nuance. And so I'm wondering how, with the men in our lives, we can maybe encourage, the awareness of things, but not have it triggering into some sort of obsession, which I know is a really big question, but maybe you can break it down for us.
Yeah, it is. It's really hard to do that because it tends to be a personality kind of a trait too. And then it's encouraged. So you have a lot of men, and I mean women too, but just for the sake of our conversation about men, you got a lot of men who think very black and white about everything. Their job, maybe they're an engineer. That's my main day job. I'm a software engineer, which is an odd mix to be a software engineer and a intuitive eating coach. But you think in a very black and white way. And it's very easy for me too, in my own training and everything with my climbing and stuff, to fall into that habit of trying to optimize things too much and to think about things in a very black and white way. So I have to always remind myself that there's a lot of leeway here on how I can approach this particular situation. That black and white thinking can be challenging because, like I said, it may be a natural thing. And then it doesn't help the fact that a lot of men talk in those black and white ways to each other, so that it's being reinforced. And so I know what I'm trying to do in these groups I'm involved in is, whenever there's an opportunity where I can jump in, is to approach it and to ask different questions. So, for example, somebody asked a question about they would need to lose a pretty substantial amount of weight by November 3rd or something. And I was like, okay, well, it sounds to me, I've heard that question asked before when it was somebody who was getting ready to go in the military, or they had a military thing come up where every 2 years they have to get weighed and measured, or else they get penalties and they could even get kicked out and stuff like that. So it's like, get some clarification there, because if it is a military thing, that's a whole different thing. Then you have to decide, is it worth it? Not, you got to decide for yourself if you're going to push yourself. And then, no, he just didn't want to go into the fall with a big belly. Okay, so now we have this arbitrary date, this arbitrary amount of weight, and it was all because of just didn't want to go in with a big belly. So I listened to where he's coming from. He's still caught up on losing weight. So I did not come at him with the whole weight neutral body acceptance and this kind of thing. It was more, think about what you're doing here as far as this amount of weight that you think you're going to try and lose. And it's not a very reasonable amount. It's certainly not sustainable by any stretch. So, I said, basically, think about some of the changes that maybe are very obvious that you could make that would improve your health, and sort of redirect it. And after that, several people said this was a great response. There was a lot more to my response than that, but several other people kind of reinforced that idea that while most of the responses were, yeah, go for it, dude, make it happen, push through, all that kind of stuff. So I think that the more conversations that we can have, the more it's going to change some of that way of thinking and getting away from the black and white. And that's really as a spouse, that even if you have even if your husband is still caught up in wanting to do all of the optimizing and stuff, just dropping some of those little pebbles. I taught a presentation a while back for a Christian group. And the things that I suggested was a pebble in the shoe. And I picked that up from an apologetics ministry that I've followed for years, where it's just, you're not trying to convince them of something or change something completely all at one shot. It's giving them something to chew on that's going to annoy them periodic. It's going to pop up in their head now and then, kind of like if you have a pebble in your shoe, it's not constantly bothering you, but when it shifts, you're like, that's... And so that kind of idea. And so I think that's one way that you can get people to move away from that black and white thinking, is to just intentionally find things that you think might resonate with that person, rather than expecting them to change overnight.
Yeah, that's good wisdom. I love that pebble in the shoe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Jeff, do you do coaching? So if someone's like, oh, my husband could use, or, my son, my adult son, something like that, you do coaching. Okay.
Yeah. I'll work with teenagers depending on what's going on with the situation. And then also adult men primarily.
Awesome.
So.
Okay. And then the other thing that you have that I think is very interesting, I would love if you can tell us about it, is your app called the Non-Diet Companion. Tell us more about this.
Yeah. So it's an app that I developed a while back, and it is designed as kind of a journaling thing. It has a number of different prompts and types of journals that they're journal templates basically in there that have different journal prompts that you can respond to inside the app, and different categories and that kind of a thing. And it has, like a hunger and fullness scale part in there where you can log your hunger and fullness reflections in there. So it's not a food tracking app like MyFitnessPal or something like that. It's more for those people who still like to either journal or log some things that they can then reflect on and go back to. It's really helpful with that. And it also allows you to track your physical activity in a couple of different ways. One is detailed workout tracking, where you can track your sets and reps and weight and all of that kind of stuff. Not body weight lifted. It does not have a body weight tracker. And then then there's another way where you can track it more of like a reflection type of a thing. So instead of tracking all of the details, you might track how you felt and how the workout felt and what you might like to change next time. And you might put in there how much weight you lifted on something, but it allows you to do that in a way that doesn't turn into kind of an obsession, which can happen for some people. So that's the gist of the app. And yeah, so for some people, they find that real helpful to be able to journal in there and have access to it inside the app and on the website and that kind of a thing. And some people just like to write in a notebook. They like the feel of paper. And so there's just all kinds of different ways that people like to kind of keep track of what they're doing and journaling and reflecting. And it's just one of those tools that for some people can be really helpful.
And I think that points to what we were talking about earlier with awareness. Mm-hmm. So sometimes just taking a minute to kind of think about like, okay, well, how did this make me feel, or whatever it is, and writing it down. I mean, obviously we're seeing so much science come out of the power of recognizing our thoughts and putting them out there, whether it's through a pen and paper or an app or something like that. So I love that. Where can people get the app if they're interested in it?
Yeah, it's available for iOS and Android. And so you just search for Non-Diet Companion at the app stores. And yeah, you can download it there. And yeah,
Awesome.
Really
Jeff, tell people how they can connect with you if they're interested in working with you.
Yeah, so you can reach me through my Instagram account, which is intuitive.eating.men. And you can send me a direct message there, or you can email me at hopedrivesmecoaching@gmail.com. I offer a free initial consultation. So it's not I know some coaches offer like a 15-minute discovery call. I actually give you an hour. So you get a totally free, no obligation hour. So if you want to use it to find out if we'd work well together and then work together long term, or if you just want to use it to ask a few questions about how to get started, we're then happy to do that too. So if anybody's interested in that, while I do primarily work with men, if you are a woman and you're listening and you'd like to talk to me about how to help the man in your life who may not be open to it, that's also something that has been helpful for some people as well. So I've done some of those, even just one-off calls like that, where we get together and just kind of brainstorm some ideas based on kind of the person's particular background. So I have a background as a children's pastor and worship leader and those kinds of things, as well as this. So I'm able to bring that into. So I always like working. I don't just work with Christians, but I always like when I do, because then we can bring in all the spiritual aspects as well.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. You wear a lot of hats. That's really impressive. And that's also really generous to give a full hour of a consult. So thank you for that. Okay. I've got a couple questions that I ask all my guests. One of them is, I love learning about people's tattoos, because I have found when people decide to put something on their body for the rest of their lives, they often have meaning behind it. So I was wondering if you have any, if you'd be willing to share. And if you don't, but you had to get one, what would it be and where would it go?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I don't have any tattoos, and I've gone back and forth. And I really don't know what I would end up getting, because I'd want something that was meaningful, but it's just so hard to come up with something. You know, my wife has like 8 tattoos. So it's kind of funny. My wife's got, big ones on her back and her ankle and all kinds. So yeah, it's interesting how she's got the tattoos and I don't. But honestly, I couldn't tell you what I'd put on. It'd just have to be something in the moment. Maybe I'd match something with my wife or something.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, for whatever it's worth, I've been asking this question for over 4 years, and I think I finally figured out what I would do. So it's okay if you don't.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
It took a long time. Do you have a meaningful Bible verse that you would like to share?
Yeah. And in fact, I almost jumped in with it earlier because we were talking, and I thought, well, this kind of goes right along when you were talking about the passage. So my first wife passed away in 2010. Kind of unexpectedly. And that was my moment of changing from the pull yourself up by your bootstraps and suck it up mentality about depression, anxiety, mental health things. That was where I kind of learned, oh, wow, it's not quite that easy. So I ended up going to a counselor, and I used to be one of those very, very much against that kind of thing. And one of the things that my counselor had me listened to was a sermon, and it covered Psalm 42, but specifically the part of Psalm. Well, if you're just as a refresher, it's the one that says, "As a deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. Where can I go and meet with God? My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me all day long, 'Where is your God?' These things I remember as I pour out my soul, how I used to go to the house of God under the protection of the Mighty One with shouts of joy and praise among the festive throng." And then finally it jumps into, "Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God." So it was the focus of that was on this idea that we have this constant conversation going on with ourselves 24 hours a day, and that often directing that conversation back to the things of God and the truth of things. In this one, it's, what the psalmist is saying, "Why are you downcast, my soul? Why are you disturbed? Put your hope in God." So he's basically coaching himself back into the truth of what's really happening there. And so I thought that was just been a really helpful passage for me personally. And I think it's something that can really be helpful for people adopting a non-diet approach, is that reminding yourself that my body's not an object. My body is not just for looking at. My body is able to do these things, and look how strong I am. Like, just these conversations that we have. And, sometimes affirmations, we see those kinds of things. And I think sometimes those can go a little too far, where we get wrapped up in, instead of confessing or like telling ourselves, "I'm a good person," that kind of thing. I think we can get off track, but I think there's an aspect of that can be really helpful, especially when we're doing something like a non-diet approach to our health and nutrition.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's good. And yeah, I'm really sorry about your wife. Especially if that was super unexpected. And I love that psalm as well, because I think it's such an invitation for us to recognize the hard things that are going on, or the, the challenges in our own head, and still point to Christ. Or, obviously it's not in the Psalms. That wasn't You know what I mean?
Yeah.
but still stay focused on Jesus, I guess is
hmm
a better way of saying it. Okay, I'm going to let you have the last word. What is the one simple thing you would like us to remember about this conversation, big or small, but just boil it down to one simple thing?
Oh, wow. Yeah. So just understand that men and women do tend to think differently, but that men do have a lot of the same kinds of issues. They just manifest differently. So we still have those body image issues. And so don't take it for granted that your husband or your son is okay. If there are some behaviors, some ideas that they're talking about, if there's, if it looks, if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it might, if men engage in a lot of disordered eating behaviors also, and it may not be an eating disorder, but at the same time, it could lead to problematic things binge eating is something that's so common right now. And it's all rooted in that. It's so many cases, it's not always, but in so many cases, it's rooted in these disordered behaviors that lead to and progress to that. And a lot of times it can be headed off if you catch it early and just address it head on that, hey, this isn't necessary. This isn't something that's beneficial to you. There may be another way to get to the ultimate goal that you have of being healthy and being strong and being there for your family long term that don't involve going these crazy routes that these guys are often encouraged to go down.
Yeah, very true. Okay, that is all for today. Go out there and have a graced day. Thanks for spending some of your time with me today. If this episode resonated with you, I would be so grateful if you would share it with a friend who might benefit from it. A simple text, email, or social media post could make a real difference in someone's life, and it's so appreciated by me. By spreading the word, you're helping grow our community of women over 40 committed to holistic health. And if you're feeling a little extra supportive, a review on your podcast app goes a long way. Thanks for being part of this. See you next time. Hey, I'm so glad you've tuned in today. Thank you. A quick note before we go. This podcast has over 400 episodes and is on a journey of growth and evolution, just like all of us. Some episodes before January 2024 may contain references to diet culture or perspectives that don't fully align with our current approach to health and wellness from a weight-neutral, intuitive eating perspective. So, listen with a discerning ear, take what serves you, and leave the rest. Thanks for understanding and for growing with us on this journey.